Hey guys, this is Kirob speaking, and in today's little dev update we are going to talk about the current state of the open beta, public release of it, and what is coming right thereafter. And yeah, in the background you see current game footage from the latest release candidate build of the open beta. So first of all, let's talk about what this means, the release and release candidates and all that stuff. Well, the release candidate is basically a version which we think overall is decent enough to push to the public branch, but we want to make sure that we haven't introduced some kind of bad crash errors and other mistakes with the latest patches, and that is why we still have it in open beta and try to check it. If it turns out that it is running well enough, and that doesn't mean it's perfect of course, then we will push it to the public branch, which then means that you still have access to old automation, but also to the new version if you want to, and they are compatible in that you can play them, like try out the new Unreal version, but also go back and play your campaign. Currently we have a few more crash issues, and we are not really able to see where they are coming from. They seem very generic, and not everyone is getting them, obviously, otherwise that would be a really bad issue. But it's bad enough that some people are still getting crashes and we really don't know where they're coming from. The error reports are only semi-helpful for some of them, and they are very generic, so it seems to have something to do with fixtures still, but we're quite unsure of where the fault actually lies, and we are currently investigating. But anyway, apart from that, please continue reporting your errors. At some point we sure crack the puzzle and get these last remaining crash bugs solved. Other than that, I think we are now at a spot where this version is polished enough to be put on the public branch, and it is definitely not content complete in any shape or form, and we will add much more content in the coming weeks to this version, but we do need to start to move forward again to implement important features like the tutorial scenarios, actual scenarios, and car scenarios, so all that good stuff before we then move on to implementing engineering and the factory stuff to build the basis for the light campaign V3. For the Tycoon part, we have come up with a pretty cool concept, which I'm going to show you in the next few little dev updates as we are working on it, and that is a much more integrated way of designing your trims and models and managing them. So no longer will you have this massive series of linearly going through the engineering and the factory stuff, but rather it is the designer is more separate from the actual management of the engineering and the factory, which probably makes a little bit more sense. It's much more contained in that way and less confusing, and I'm looking forward to showing you some of the drafts we have. But before we get ahead of ourselves with the Tycoon stuff, let's talk about what is up next first, the scenarios. And there will be new stuff, new in quotations, as well as actual new stuff in there. We are going to retire some of the very old scenarios that came out with the very first release, I think, right? Was in April 2012 we had the first scenarios, and we still have them today, although so much has changed in the engine and car design and overall the engineering and factory stuff, so they are kind of outdated nowadays. And what we are going to do is make a completely new series of engine designer scenarios, tutorial scenarios, and also we are going to revamp the normal scenarios that already are there, and we have a big pack of scenarios that were never released because we were waiting for all the engine types to come out. They were made like a few years ago as well, and they are made such that they are compatible with all engine types, even boxes and stuff. We activated all engines back then for the closed beta testers, and there was no engine art, obviously, so it was completely void of sound and graphics, but you could build them and get the stats out, which was the main thing for the scenarios, and there are quite a few funny ones in there and interesting ones. So looking forward to that. So more scenarios are coming, and much better ones. So the big thing there is that we want to move away from the total cost stat, which we have in there, and instead move towards having production units as well as engineering time, which are much better concepts to tackle, considering that this is a tycoon game and not an engine building sandbox game. Well, it is that too, but not primarily. So the scenarios definitely will be revamped and much more helpful in understanding the game, including a few scenarios which just tell you how to build archetypical engines for various cars, like how do you build a good engine for a utility vehicle. That is probably something that is currently missing, and it will greatly smooth out the difficulty curve for new players. Some have remarked that the UI seems a little hard to read and cluttered on the left-hand side panel because there are so many stats there now. But yes, we are aware of that, but we think overall that is the better compromise because it allows us to do certain things which are very, very helpful, like the stat comparison between engines and so on, that we couldn't possibly do before. Also showing the market demographics there and so on, which is super useful. And in scenarios you will see the biggest benefit, because now we can have more than just the demographics as a scoring stat, but we can include something like the car needs to have at least 50 sportiness, and the more you have, the better your score will be. On top of what the demographic score is. So that will make the scenarios, the car scenarios, a lot more interesting. And it just fits nicely into the UI we've designed for it, which is so compatible to all kinds of different situations in automation. One thing I'm really excited about getting back into the game is the challenge mode. You guys who had the game for a long time, you might remember that at some point we actually had multiplayer and a scenario challenge mode with like high score lists and a global leaderboard and massive multiplayer fun. There were like 15 people in one game trying to design the best engine possible within 3 minutes of time in a randomly generated scenario. That was a lot of fun, and we are bringing that back. But not in multiplayer, not yet in multiplayer. Multiplayer is something we're going to tackle after the main game is complete. And that mode that is coming back will be in single player, so that you have randomly generated scenarios which you can tackle, where you can set the difficulty rating, and then you click play, and then it starts a countdown, shows the stats you need to accomplish or to achieve, and then you are thrown in there and you have 3 minutes of time to actually solve the scenario and score as highly as possible. And that, I think, is a lot of fun to bring this back. And I think this will be great even for the most experienced of players who have played this for like 5 years and know the engine designer inside out. But there are some... yeah, there can be some really harsh scenarios generated. Also, we had some flags there that were like, yeah, you can only test the engine once or twice or something. We'll see if we can bring that back easily or not, but that was some real hardcore shit right there. Anyway, once we have this whole scenario business sorted out and rebalanced, we are going to attack, of course, more of the UI things for the light campaign and properly implement that in its light campaign V3 version. So, okay, that's all the information for today. Hope you enjoyed, and see you guys next time.